Hey guys, welcome to the third part of the realistic railroad guide for city skylines. I showed you an example build in the previous part. Go check it out together with the first one if you haven't already. So today we will deal with realistic train speeds. I will introduce a few new mods that we will need. It's going to be the Traffic Manager, President Edition, and Advanced Vehicle Options. At first, I wanted to go through the basic theory of train movement on curves together with some explanation of the norms, but it got kind of long and boring, so what I did instead is this. It's a table that I made following the Czech norms again, so it might be a bit different around the world, but physics don't really change much around the planet, so probably even these values would be very similar everywhere. This table assumes one important thing, and that is the railroad you are designing only has one type of trains on it that always reach the same traveling speed, or the trains all go as fast as the slowest train type. I'm assuming that when building railroads in this game, you are already separating at least the cargo and passenger trains, and if you want to build some high-speed railroad, probably for intercity trains, then it definitely should be separated from all the other train types as well. So I'm not going to explain mixed traffic as it's a bit more complicated and probably not that useful for this game anyway. Now back to this table. It has two rows for speeds. The first one is the ideal speed, for which the passage through the curve is perfectly ideal. That means the passengers and cargo won't even notice any centrifugal force thanks to the railroad being tilted or super elevated as high as it can be, according to the norms, of course. Also, the rails are not going to be that worn after some time. It's simply the ideal situation which you should follow. Then we also have the maximum speed, which is the absolute maximum speed allowed that must not be exceeded. But apart from that ideal speed, for this one, passengers might be a bit annoyed with the centrifugal forces, and maybe some fragile cargo might have a problem. Also, from maintenance point of view, the outer rail will get worn out a lot faster. This maximum speed can only be used for certain reasons. The one that is probably the most important for us in this game is that it might be used if you, for example, have a railroad that would have a reasonably high speed, but the trains would need to considerably slow down for one particular curve. So for that curve, we could go with that maximum speed instead of the ideal one. But this does not mean that we should use the maximum speed in all the curves. If you feel that you want to have a faster railroad instead of going for the maximum speed everywhere, you just need to design it better with higher radii. Usually, railroads are done so that there is a constant speed between two stops, or at least a constant speed on longer segments. Slowing down for just one curve is fine, although it should be a minimal change. For example, if I have a railroad with normal traveling speed of, let's say, 200 kilometers an hour, I should not have one curve where I need to slow down to 100, for example. In real life, you already choose the traveling speed before designing the railroad, and then you design the railroad so you can achieve that speed everywhere with maybe a few small slowdowns in some curves if there's no other way. I suppose that in city skylines we do it the other way around, so you probably need to examine the railroad you built and see its tightest curve, determine the speed for it, and then decide, do I want to put that speed everywhere else on that railroad? Or am I just going to slow down for this curve? Or would I need to slow down way too much and need to rebuild it? Now, of course, one really important thing here is to understand the technical limitations of certain trains. For example, if you build a cargo railroad and you get, let's say, 100 kilometers an hour for the tightest curve, even though in theory other curves on that railroad could have maybe twice as that, then you can easily go for that 100 kph everywhere because realistically, cargo trains won't go faster than that anyway. It's always a good idea, if you are using a train vehicle from the workshop, to do some research and find its maximum real-life speeds. So let's practically change the speed limits for the railroad we built last time. I already measured and calculated what kind of curve radii we're looking at here. Then I roughly interpolated the speed values from the table we have seen before and rounded it down to the nearest 10. As we can see, this curve right here is a weak spot of the entire railroad, and we are looking at some 60 kph ideal and 80 maximum speed here. When I was building this railroad in the last video, I already mentioned that it would probably be some small local passenger railroad. I need to know this for that final speed decision. Obviously, if I had some faster intercity railroad in mind for this segment here, these speeds would be unacceptable. But for a local railroad, it's fine. I'm also now going to pick the vehicle type I'll use here, and it will be this little real-life Polish diesel train, which according to Wikipedia has a maximum speed of 120. But I know from experience that over here, this particular type runs between small towns on really old railroads for much lower speeds than that, factory maximum, so a perfect pick. So in this particular case, I decided that I'm alright with the radii I built and the speeds I can achieve here. I'm going to choose a speed limit of 80 kilometers an hour on the entire thing with a slowdown to 70 in that tightest curve. So for it, I'm going to go right between the ideal and maximum speeds, and also going to go a bit over the ideal speed for that second tightest curve as well. Curves right after the lower station can support much greater speeds, but it's pointless to raise the speed limit there, as there's the train station where the train needs to stop, so they already need to be braking or accelerating, from it. Now, I'm going to use the Traffic Manager President Edition mod to put that 80 kilometers an hour on the entire railroad. So I'm just going to pick the speed limitations, choose 80, and shift click on one segment, which then changes it for the entire railroad. Now I'll go here and just put the curve to 70. What you might be thinking at this point is, wait, hold up, so you're saying that this railroad, which actually looks quite generous with the curve radii compared to the size of the city Skylines map, can only have some 80 kilometers an hour maximum speed? How am I ever going to build high-speed railroad in this game? Is it really like this in real life? Unfortunately it is. Doing realistic railroad requires a lot of space and careful planning, and high-speed railroad pretty much needs to be just a straight line in this game. In real life, railroads must have really big curve radii to even begin to think about some traveling speeds that cars could easily achieve on much tighter highways. But looking over YouTube and various screenshots what people build, the most common railroad you will probably ever design and build is going to be some small urban or regional railroad for speeds not exceeding 120 or 160 maybe, and cargo for not more than 100. You probably noticed that the traffic manager only does the 130 kilometers an hour maximum limit. It can also do the unlimited sign, but if you want, for example, 140 or more limitations, you're out of luck. The only way I know of to limit the train speed higher than 130 is to change the hard limit for that vehicle type. One way to do it is by using the advanced vehicle options or the improved public transport mod, maybe some others as well, but I will use the AVO as we will need it later for something else. This way you can build a railroad for, let's say, 160, but you have to make the railroad constant speed now. All I need to do here in this mod is find the vehicle type I want and type in the hard limit right here. Maybe you need to change it for the trailers as well, I'm not exactly sure about that, but probably just the engine is fine. Alright, so that was the speed limit part. Now we need to talk about another super important aspect of a real-life railroad in regards to this game. And that is trains' acceleration and braking. I already mentioned it a bit before when I said that it's useless to raise speed limits just before some stations, because trains won't go that fast there anyway, as they already need to be decelerating for a stop. But this is a bit more complicated issue and actually affects the entire railroad design, vehicle selection, and the overall speed limits as well. Let's first talk about the real numbers here. I managed to find some real-life figures for train accelerations. For passenger trains, it's around 1 meter per second squared. It's a bit lower, even all the way down to 0.4 for some long distance trains, and can go to around 1.5 for short distance trains or light rails or metro. I haven't found some proper numbers for cargo trains, but apparently it might be around 0.2 because they do accelerate really, really slow. Okay, so those are nice numbers, but how to translate them into the game? Using the advanced vehicle options again, I'm going to find the train I want to change, and I'm going to search for the acceleration and braking right here. But there's a catch, because what we have here are not meters per second squared. I'm not sure what kind of unit this is, some made up game unit maybe. But after a quick train acceleration test, I got these numbers and what acceleration they represent. Braking can be the same as acceleration. There are some differences for real-life trains, but they are not that big. Talking about normal operation, of course, not emergency braking. For passenger trains, deceleration and accelerations are usually the same for passenger comfort, even though the train itself is capable of accelerating and especially braking a bit faster. Just a note about the cargo trains. What I found is the acceleration for some normal train. When I say normal, I mean really long American-style train with maybe 100 trailers. Obviously, in City Skylines, cargo trains are nothing like that. But cargo trains in this game are already a bit unrealistic because you usually use them to transport cargo around the map. So at maximum some 10 kilometers, no one would bother to load a cargo train to transport stuff these short distances these days. So as far as cargo trains go, we usually build like an industrial sidings or a short goods delivery tracks. Also, the trains are much shorter, so maybe the acceleration and braking would be closer to the passenger's train acceleration. I honestly don't know here, but the 0.2 meters per second squared is painfully slow, and the train would accelerate to its normal speed for ages. It might even need a longer railroad than what we usually build in this game to even reach its speed limit. Obviously, in real life, if the cargo train goes hundreds of kilometers, it doesn't matter that it takes a few minutes before it reaches some 100 kilometers an hour speed. Right, so we did that, and now our trains accelerate and brake at more realistic rates. But now we might have a different problem that I already kind of mentioned. Let's imagine we have this nice and straight railroad between two stations. Speed limits might be as big as 200 kilometers an hour. Nice and fast railroad, right? Wrong. The train stations are really close to each other, so the train, before it reaches the speed limit, needs to start braking already. So what do I need to do? I need to create a balance between all these things. Spaces between stations, vehicle type, which basically means acceleration, and speed limits. It is quite straightforward. If I have an urban railroad, which is the metro or some light rail, for example, I have short distances between stations. I kind of need that. That's the point of that entire network. Therefore, I need higher vehicle acceleration, which means I need to pick proper vehicle type. In real life, it's probably something that has all-wheel drives, and the speed limits might be lower. For example, 80 kilometers an hour, I believe, is the limit for the Prague's metro. If I have some regional railroad connecting different smaller towns, I can have lower acceleration for better passenger comfort. Higher acceleration would not give me much more time saved here, as the distance is much greater, and overall I can have higher speed limits. And if I build two train stations like really close to each other, then I'm just doing it wrong, because train stations are not like that in real life. Better use a tram line instead, for example. As a rule of thumb, it's probably the best to have a railroad where the trains go their maximum speed limit on the majority of the track. If I'm going to build a track where they accelerate on maybe like 40% of the track and then just a tiny little segment where they go that maximum speed before they need to brake, that's probably a bad design. Alright, so those were the train speeds and accelerations. I think I said everything important, so you might go ahead and build some nice and realistic railroads in your cities. I'm going to do one more video for this series where I would like to show you a precision railroad design method, so stay tuned for that. Check out the previous parts if you haven't, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you next time.